recording events without much delay. Therefore, emotion-related events taking place on a day-to-day basis should also be recorded without much delay. However, there is an important qualification. The record should be prepared after the influence of the refractory period is over, because logical thinking may not be possible during that period. Once you have recovered your normal ability to think clearly, record the event as soon as reasonably possible. The purpose of maintaining these records is not simply to create a diary of unpleasant experiences. The real purpose is to analyze the details and discover whether there is any pattern related to the triggering mechanism of adverse emotions. For example, after keeping records for several weeks, you might discover that your anger does not arise randomly. Perhaps it occurs mainly when you are tired. Perhaps it occurs after repeated interruptions. Perhaps it occurs when you feel that somebody has ignored your opinion. Or perhaps several of these factors occur together. As your observation skill improves, you will be able to distinguish such patterns much more clearly. What initially appears to be a collection of unrelated emotional incidents may gradually reveal a recognizable pattern. When the pattern is not obvious, but what should you do if you cannot identify these simple relationships? If you are unable to identify the simple relationships with regard to the triggering mechanisms, it is advisable to go through the records again with an intelligent close friend who is genuinely willing to help you. Another person may sometimes see a connection that you cannot see yourself. For example, you may believe that your anger is caused by what another person says, but a close and genuinely helpful friend may notice that your emotional reactions occur mainly when you are already tired, under pressure, or dealing with several problems simultaneously. In many cases, identification of the pattern related to the triggering mechanism is simple, but at times the underlying triggering mechanism may be a complex one. It is important to understand this distinction. Some of the reasons that lead to emotions may not be simple, because the origin of the actual reason may not be visible under normal circumstances. There may be an underlying factor that is not immediately apparent, because such cases have to be managed in a different way. It is important, especially at the beginning, to minimize the easily avoidable emotions. We do not have to solve every complicated emotional problem immediately. Start with the easier problems. Actually, the purpose of emotional management should be directed toward minimizing the adverse effects of emotions. Therefore, you should not attempt to address the more difficult emotional problems at the initial stage. This is an important practical principle. Suppose you have identified several emotional problems. Some may be relatively simple to manage. Others may have complicated backgrounds that are difficult to understand. It is better to begin with the simpler ones. Minimizing the effects of more difficult emotions will require additional skills. The development of these skills can take some time, and the rate at which these skills develop can vary from person to person. There's no reason to expect everybody to develop these abilities at the same speed. However, there is an encouraging point. The overall benefit that can be achieved by applying simple techniques can be quite significant. Therefore, you should start practicing those simple techniques without waiting for other skills to mature. You do not have to wait until you have completely understood every aspect of your emotional life. Begin with what you can observe. Begin by recording what happens. Begin by identifying the easier triggers. Begin by reducing the emotional reactions that can be reduced relatively easily. As you continue this process, your observation skills can improve. Your records can become more useful. And patterns that were previously difficult to see may become clearer. And this gradual process can provide a practical foundation for more effective emotional management. And conclusion. So, what have we learned from this discussion? The purpose of maintaining records of negative emotions is not to keep reminding ourselves of unpleasant experiences. The purpose is to understand them better by recording the type of emotion, the date and time, the place, our mood beforehand, the people present, the activity we were engaged in, the possible triggering mechanism, repeated actions, what happened afterwards, the reactions of others, our thought processes, our later mood, and our physical condition. We gradually collect useful information about our emotional experiences. When these records are examined together, patterns may begin to appear. Some patterns may be simple and easy to recognize. Others may be much more complex. When we cannot identify a pattern ourselves, the assistance of a genuinely helpful close friend may sometimes be useful. But we do not have to solve every emotional problem at once. In fact, it is better to begin with the simpler and more easily avoidable emotional reactions. The objective is to minimize the adverse effects of emotions. The skills required for dealing with more difficult emotional problems can be developed gradually, and different people may develop these skills at different rates. Therefore, there is no need to wait until we have developed every skill before we begin. We can start now with simple observation, careful recording, and attention to the patterns that gradually emerge. By doing this consistently, we can learn more about our own emotional reactions and gradually develop better ways of managing them. That is the practical value of maintaining records of negative emotions. Thank you for listening.